All right, guys. Good to speak with you today. I'm glad to hear from you. So today we're gonna do a solo episode, and we're gonna talk about sort of a mix of current events and then just some thoughts I had about history and about the future. So first thing we're gonna discuss is Maui, an island, the Hawaiian chain of islands, and the occupied territories of Hawaii. Recently had some severe fires which tore through a few towns. Death tolls in the 50s, as far as I know currently, based on the most recent information that's come out. And I really think one of the things that needs to be discussed here while we're discussing this, obviously, there's the climate change angle, things are getting more intense, but really just what is it going to mean to live on an island in the future? What are the challenges and the stresses of that going to be? Now, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but there's something I know is that when you're looking at, sites to prep for in the future, if things get bad, society collapses, climate change does, as much damage as the doomsayers think it will do. New Zealand, which is an island, is actually listed as probably the best place to live in that event. It'll be one of the places least affected and, if it is affected, most capable of recovering. But the worst places to live are also islands in that region. In particular, the Maldives. Pretty much every citizen of the Maldives knows, and their government knows, that it will not be possible to continue living there. That island chain is sinking. Every citizen will have to relocate. I believe most of them are going to relocate to Australia. A few are going to relocate to Indonesia, which is interesting considering the capital of Indonesia is actually sinking. Several of the islands that are the most populated actually are sinking and will eventually be entirely underwater. That's sort of different from climate change, though it is also caused by man. It's man-made. The effects, they're sinking because they just built too much on top of them. Can't handle the strain, can't handle that burden, so they've begun to sink into the water. Now, ocean levels clearly rising around the world, affecting a variety of nations, but it is interesting how specifically Pacific Island nations are both best poised and least able to adapt to this. So some of them are the best in the best possible position to continue to survive and thrive in the wake of a climate catastrophe, and there are others which will be either unlivable, which a lot of places in the world are going to be that way, and there are a few that are simply just not going to be there. They are going to be underwater. The Solomon Islands, another Pacific island chain. This country near Papua New Guinea, so it's in the Melanesia region. A lot of Solomon Islanders are already suffering these effects, and as a society that is pretty removed from the global interconnected trade networks and just, I guess, the global civilization, if you want to call it that, the effects are being they're extremely drastic in the ways that they're affecting those people, because they simply just they're having to deal with it on their own. Not a lot of international aid and support coming through, even though they're obviously not contributing to climate change nearly as much as some other nations. They're going to bear the brunt of it, and they're not going to be assisted very much by some of the main culprits. So I do think this is interesting, and the obviously the situation in Maui, a true tragedy. Thoughts and prayers to everybody who's suffering from that situation as it currently stands. But it does beg the question: is it going to be feasible for humanity to continue to exist on those islands? And I know this sounds a little bad coming from me, somebody who's not indigenous to any of those islands. To say that, we have to, the people who have lived there their whole lives, their family, their ancestors, everybody's lived on these islands for thousands of years. For me to say it might not be feasible for them to continue to do that, to live where they've always lived, it might sound insensitive, but I mean, it is a reality that we're going to have to address. Whether or not, it sounds good or it comes across as purely empathetic, it is empathetic, whether it comes off that way or not. These people are going to suffer the effects of things that oftentimes not their fault. It's the fault of greater society, I guess you could say, maybe even particular corporations you might want to blame, but wherever the blame goes, these people are going to be affected by it, and they're going to have to make decisions about either A, can anybody continue to live on these islands after a certain point? Is it going to be feasible? Is the amount of work it's going to take to continue to get food and keep infrastructure up and keep everybody alive and safe on these islands, is it going to be worth the effort to live there? And also, is it going to be even possible? If it's going to get to a point where no amount of effort is going to make them livable, then obviously the answer is, hey, you got to go. It's going to be terrible. I'm sure a lot of culture will be lost, unfortunately. But that's just reality. But the real question is, if it doesn't get that bad, but it gets bad enough that it's a significant investment to be able to keep anybody there, is it going to be worth it for people who are indigenous to these islands to stay there? Is it going to be worth it to keep, Hawaii inhabited by even native Hawaiians if it's going to be just a net drain and there will be no, not necessarily positive economic, exchange? I understand, can't always view things from a purely economic perspective, but if it's just a continual resource drain and they're going to become utterly dependent on other nations in order to be able to continue to live and thrive on an island in which they were previously perfectly capable of independently living and surviving on, is that worth it? Or is it better to just move somewhere else, make the adjustments, and find a way to accommodate more people in another area? And that's a question for global society, as I mentioned, for everybody on Earth. Like I mentioned, Australia is going to have to figure out what to do with all the Maldivians who are eventually going to relocate and eventually try to merge into Australian society once their nation is completely submerged under the sea. But the question for Hawaiians is a bit different because they are currently technically citizens of a bigger nation, of the United States of America. So it would be possible for them to just immigrate to mainland America and try to make things work there. But at the same time, Hawaiians are an indigenous ethnic group. They're not Native Americans, but they are native to the region they live in, which is an occupied territory of the United States. So the question is it worth it for them to completely move, or should they stay no matter what the cost is, no matter how many resources have to be thrown at it, no matter how dependent they become, no matter how much they may have to just beg for resources, for help from some of these larger governments in order to be able to stay and live where they always have. And that's not something that really sounds like. Basically, I'll say it this way. If I was a native Hawaiian, it wouldn't be a way I would want to live. I kind of wish I had someone else on right now just so I could bounce this idea off of them and see what they think, though, because I do know there are people who maybe feel more attached to their homelands than I do. I don't really have a homeland to be attached to per se, but I know that it's an interesting question for some people, and I know that there are some people who would just completely disagree with me. They would say no matter what, you're going to stay where you've lived, where you've always lived, where your family and everybody that came before you lived. If this is the land of your people, you stay, you fight for it no matter what it takes. Even if it becomes economically unfeasible, you're always going to try to make it work. And I respect that. I just do wonder what choice all of these groups who are living on islands, which are going to be severely affected by the coming changes to the world and potentially unlivable or close to unlivable, what decisions they're going to make in the face of all these terrible circumstances that are coming to them. And it's just, at what point do you cut your losses? Do you wait till it's completely 100% impossible to live there? Or do you get to a point where it's so difficult and you're losing more than you're gaining and you say, well, time to cut my losses? And how do you define where that line is? Where the line that you're losing more than you're gaining and peace and maintenance of your culture is? Hard to know. I think we'll have to start asking those questions pretty soon, though, based on how things are going. Well, as always, thank you for tuning in and listening to me, guys. I really do appreciate all of you. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Have a wonderful day.